Well, hey everybody, welcome back to class. And I want to say welcome to module number 4, our second week discussing this helping approach, this old helping approach called existential theory, developed by many, many different theorists, but really Viktor Frankl is the man who is given the credit normally for the development of this thing called existential theory. And so, as we did with psychoanalytic theory, we are going to spend a couple of weeks looking at this theory. Your lecture notes this week focus on, in module number 4, the counseling applications or the helping applications that come out of this very, very important foundational helping approach, which belongs to what is called the humanistic school of psychology or counseling. The next theory we talk about in module number 5, person-centered theory, and Carl Rogers. We'll talk more about existentialism and humanism a little bit when we cover Carl Rogers in the next couple of weeks. But first, existential theory. Now, this is a way of review. During module number 3, we talked about just some core key ideas related to this theory. And one of the things I highlighted for you was that this is kind of a philosophical theory. This is a theory that kind of promotes this idea of looking inside ourselves and kind of deep thinking and that kind of thing. And so sometimes, not always, but sometimes for students, it can be kind of hard to kind of wrap our brain around a little bit some of this theory because it's a little bit more existential, so a little bit more introspective and philosophical, so to speak, which sometimes can make it a little bit more challenging. But this is a great foundational theory. So it's philosophical in nature. Core ideas as a way of review really, really quickly. There are several core ideas with all these theories, including existential theory. But the ones I think are most important, I highlighted for you last week. Number one, this is a theory that promotes the importance and the powerful importance of self-awareness, that we have the capacity, this theory teaches that we have the capacity as people to look inside ourselves and to understand who we are and why we are and what we're thinking and what we're doing and where we want to go. So even though we have blind spots like unconscious blind spots, that's true. We also have the capacity to look inside ourselves and to learn and to grow. And we can learn to see our blind spots is kind of the idea. This is a theory that promotes the importance of relationships, and it promotes the importance that you and I are born and wired to naturally want to reach out and connect with others and have them connect with us. And so in many, many ways, existential theory was one of the first counseling approaches that really promoted this idea of relationships. It wasn't the last, but it was kind of, in a way, some ways, kind of the first. This is a theory that really promotes this idea, this third idea, that as men and women, even though we have limitations and we have struggles and we have problems, and we live in an imperfect world, we also, too, as human beings, possess resources and we are powerful and we have choices and we have control. Do we have ultimate control? No. Do we have ultimate power? No. But we have personal control and we have personal power. We don't have ultimate control, we have personal control. Meaning that to a large extent, every single day, you are the one driving your life, and I'm the one driving my life. There's no one outside of me making me do anything. There is me, and I am the one who chose to get up this morning. I'm the one who decided everything I've done today is something that I've decided to do. It promotes the importance of choice. And in many, many ways, I am in control of what all is going on around me to some extent. Now, are there things around me that I am not in control of? Yes, because we live in a world where we do not have universal control, but we have personal control. And I can choose how I respond to those events that I don't have control over. And so this idea that we are somehow powerless is an idea that existential theory rejects. This idea, it promotes the idea that we are powerful and that we have personal power and control and we have personal responsibility and choice, all those kind of things. And then also too, kind of on a deeper level, this theory teaches the important idea that all of us are looking for something. We all want our lives to have meaning. We all want our lives to have purpose. We all want to feel like we're going somewhere, that we have direction in our lives. And we naturally every day are looking for purpose and meaning. This is a whole nother conversation, but we could have a conversation we wanted to in class about how this theory teaches that all of our behavior is designed for us, is really a form of us seeking purpose and meaning. This theory, Frankl was a believer that we don't do anything in our lives that isn't connected to this idea of us looking for our lives to have direction somewhere. And that's really what our choices are. Our choices are really us trying to find purpose and meaning in our lives. And one of the reasons why we have problems sometimes is we make poor choices. We look for purpose and meaning in places and in ways that don't really provide true purpose and meaning. They're kind of empty and shallow in some ways if we're not careful. But the important idea of purpose and meaning, and how we're all looking for purpose and meaning, there's those two key existential questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Are the two questions we reviewed briefly last week as we talked a little bit about purpose and meaning. Now here's our conversation for this week. Again, this lecture, this little mini video is really just intended to give you a little bit of an overview and synopsis of what I have for you in the lecture notes. So make sure you go and look at the lecture notes as you prepare to do your discussion question and as you do your homework. 5 key ideas I want to share with you out of our lecture notes. Here are 5 key helping ideas that we pull from existential theory all the time. Now, does every single social worker or therapist or counselor utilize all 5 of these ideas? Probably not. But here are 5 core foundational ideas that we often use in helping today that really come directly out of existential theory. Number 1 is this one. Now, this wasn't really what Freud intended, but when Sigmund Freud developed psychoanalytic theory, which we talked about in module 1 and number 2, in some ways, what kind of came out of that was this. The helper was kind of set up as the expert. Now, I'm not sure if that's what Freud wanted, but through the years of psychoanalytic theory being the predominant helping approach in the field of social work and counseling and human services for many, many years, part of what kind of happened was there was this culture that developed, or this idea that developed, that the client is messed up and the helper is the expert. And the helper's job is to fix the client, because the client obviously doesn't know what they're doing. If they knew what they were doing, they would do it. They don't know what they're doing. As a counselor, obviously I know what I'm doing, so I'm going to help them fix their problem. That's kind of the old Freudian idea. Viktor Frankl came along and said, you know what, a lot of that's not true, because a lot of it, here's why that's not true. As helpers, we aren't experts of anything except ourselves. We'll talk more about that next week with Carl Rogers. This idea that as helpers, our job, we are not experts. How can I be an expert of you and your life? You're the expert of you and your life. I'm the expert of me and my life, barely, right? So how can I give you answers for your life? I really can't. All I can do is help you find the answers for yourself, right? And that is an idea that we use all the time in counseling today. This idea that the person of the helper is very, very important. What do I mean when I say person of the helper? I mean this idea that as helpers, one of the things we'll talk more about with person-centered theory is that as helpers, we should never set ourselves up as an expert or someone who's better than our client. Just because you might have a degree in human services or counseling or psychology, does that make you a smart, intelligent person? Well, not necessarily, right? Does that mean that you have your act together? Not always, because that's true for all. That's not true for any of us, right? All of us have days that we don't have our acts together, right? So this idea that as helpers, we should never set ourselves up as like an expert. This idea of humility, this idea of as helpers, our role is to come alongside our clients and not fix them or their problems, but support them, encourage them, empower them. At times confronting them, at times holding them up, at times holding their hand, at sometimes walking alongside them, as a way to help them to figure out how to fix their own problems. Instead of me fixing my client's problems, my job is not to do that. My job is to help them fix their own. That's my job as a helper. And that idea really kind of comes out of existential theory. This idea that the person of the helper is really, really important. So for that reason, as I mentioned in the lecture notes, existential theory kind of moves away a little bit from the idea that part of our job is to analyze people. Remember Freud with psychoanalytic theory, that part of our role was to do analysis. Well, this theory says that's not totally wrong or bad, but you know what? Maybe what clients don't need they don't need analysis. They just need encouragement, right? So kind of a de-emphasis on analysis. This theory de-emphasizes the idea that people are sick and messed up, and they just got to be fixed. You know, they're broken, and we got to fix them. This theory kind of rejects that idea and says, people might be struggling, but they're not broken. People might make mistakes, but they're not mistakes. People are not mistakes. We make mistakes, right? So our job is to not heal sick people. Our job is to help hurting people, right? And then this idea of staying away from advice giving. Maybe you learned that in your counseling skills class, that really good helpers don't give people advice. They help people figure stuff out for themselves. And so this idea of no analysis, no advice, and instead encouraging people, instead being genuine, being real. We'll talk more about that next week. The idea of humility, the idea of coming alongside the client to help them instead of standing over them and telling them what to do. Not that, again, not that Freud promoted that, but in a way, psychoanalytic theory sort of, in a way, kind of began to breed that culture that the expert was the helper, and we'll talk more about that next week. So that's the key idea. The key idea, the first key idea, helping idea that we use all the time out of existential theory, is just the importance of the importance of the person of the helper, who the helper is as a person. If you've ever taken the dynamics of group counseling class with me, you've heard me say this in there. The greatest skill and tool you have as a helper is yourself. It's not your education. It's not your experiences, although your education and your experiences can help and empower you. Who you are as a person, how you respond to people, how you treat people, how you think, how you talk, how you handle and carry yourself. That is your greatest tool. You could have 42 degrees on the wall and be a terrible helper. You could have no degrees on the wall and be an expert helper. Well, how is that true? Because our greatest helping tool is ourselves. It's not necessarily our education. It's not the skill, it's not the tools we use, it's who's using them. That idea is what we would call a very existential idea, right? So that idea kind of comes out of existential theory, this idea of the person of the helper. Number two, second key idea that comes out of helping idea that comes out of existential theory is just this idea that what we do as helpers is we're always continually, every day, all day long, promoting personal responsibility. If you're going to work one day as a helper or as a counselor, you want to be prepared. You need to be prepared. That a lot of times our clients, they're going to want to blame other people, and they may even want to try to blame you, or their mom, or their dad, or whatever, or the weather, right, or their car, whatever, for something that they did. And so therefore, they're not really responsible for themselves. Somebody else is responsible for themselves. And as professional helpers, especially counselors and clinical social workers, every day, all day long, I said that with a smile because I mean that kind of funny. A lot of what we do is we challenge people to take personal responsibility for themselves because they are responsible for themselves, right? We're all responsible for ourselves. And so as long as I continue to blame somebody else for me, I'm going to stay right where I am or go backwards. Most of us don't want to go backwards in life. Well, it doesn't feel good, but one of the things we have to sometimes challenge our clients is, hey, one of the only ways we go forward in life is when we start saying, hey, I'm responsible for my life, right? No one else is making me do. I'm responsible for me. That's not easy to do, right? And so promoting personal responsibility is a key helping kind of a mindset that we use a lot today in helping. A lot of that has roots in existential theory. So not just this idea of the person of the helper and humility, but also to promoting personal responsibility. I put in your lecture notes this idea: life is a choice. That's kind of an idea out of existential theory. Life is a choice. The idea that there are really no true victims. Oftentimes we are victimized by the world around us, but ultimately at the end of the day, we have a choice about how we're going to respond to those situations. And so, in a way, we're not really a victim as often as we think we are. And so, this idea of promoting personal responsibility. Number three, we talked last week about how all of us are looking for purpose and meaning. So another helping idea out of existential theory is just challenging people to be careful how they look for purpose and meaning. We're going to look for purpose and meaning. It's not a matter of if we do, it's where and how. We're going to look for purpose and meaning. It's just where. So as helpers, part of our role sometimes is to challenge people to be careful about where they look for purpose and meaning. Here's what I mean by that. I'm not being critical of people having money or things, but in our culture and society, for example, people oftentimes look for their purpose and meaning in other people, or they look for their purpose and meaning in their career, or they look for purpose and meaning in success or money. And those things those things are good, but they don't really provide true purpose and meaning. True purpose and meaning is deeper and beyond all of that, right? But a lot of people fall in that trap. They look to other things. They look outside themselves for purpose and meaning. And we have to challenge people sometimes that, hey, finding our purpose and meaning starts inside here. We have to look inside ourselves and decide for ourselves who we are and why we're here, finding our true purpose and meaning. And so that's another common theme of counseling. And that kind of has roots in existential theory, challenging people, coaching people, encouraging people to be careful where they look for their true purpose and meaning. Here's the idea again. We're going to look for purpose and meaning. It's just a matter of where and how. It's not like we're not looking for it. We are looking for it. It's just where. And so we have to be careful. And part of our role sometimes as helpers is to challenge people, encourage people, coach people to be careful where they look for purpose and meaning. Fourth idea is this. We encourage people oftentimes as helpers, especially from existential theory, this idea we call live in the now. Now, what does that mean? Live in the now. Let me give you a really quick little overview. One of the things that, as you know from psychoanalytic theory, was psychoanalytic theory really put an emphasis on the past. And we would do, and oftentimes as helpers, we ask clients to tell us their story, kind of where they've come from, their backstory, as I like to call it, right? And so Freud put a big, huge emphasis on the past. There's nothing wrong with that, because I personally am a believer too, that where we've come from often influences who we are today, but it doesn't control who we are today. That's the thing. It doesn't determine, it influences. Really, who I am today, in some ways, is not up to my past, it's up to me. And so what happens oftentimes, if we're not careful with looking in the past, the problem with that is we have no control of the past. We can't control what we did or did not do yesterday. What do we have control over? Today. And so one of the things we have to be careful about with our clients and in our own lives is that we don't get too hung up on the past. Now, looking at the past is important. I'm a big believer in that. We need to learn from the past, but we don't need to live in the past. We need to live in the now. And when I first became a counselor intern many, many, many years ago, one of the things I remember that kind of struck me was how easy it was for my clients to live in the past. Many of them were wrapped up in what they did do, what they didn't do, all of this old stuff. And they were kind of hung up and living in the past. And one of the things I learned very, very quickly from the people who helped train me was, hey, Glenn, you need to help your clients learn from the past, but live in today. Today is where they have control and power. They have control over today, not yesterday. So don't spend too much time living in yesterday. Live in today. Today, the decisions we make today will influence what our life is like tomorrow. We can't do anything about yesterday. But if we make good decisions today, that influences and improves our lives potentially tomorrow and the day after. So this idea of living in the now does not mean ignoring the past. It just means being careful to not get hung up in the past. And that was and through the years, that has been one of the drawbacks or one of the sort of the knocks on psychoanalytic theory, is because it was so focused. Freud was so focused on the past that clients would get hung up in the past, we would say, and they would live in the past. And then theories like existential theory came along and said, you know what, the past is good, learning from the past is good, but living in the past is not good. Live in the now, because today is where we have control. I'll give you some information about that in the lecture notes. And then the last idea is this. I mentioned to you from last week's module that one of the things this theory sort of promotes and teaches is that we all need and look for relationships. And so if you ever work with people and work with folks in a helping setting, one of the things you will realize is people usually have lots of issues and struggles, oftentimes, unfortunately, in relationships. A lot of counseling, a lot of our conversation as counselors with our clients is really about relationships. And so we need relationships. And so just like we sometimes as helpers have to challenge people to be careful about where they search for and seek for purpose and meaning, we oftentimes have to help people same way with relationships. We have to coach them and encourage them to be careful about their relationships. Number one, we're always promoting healthy relationships. We're always, as helpers, promoting this idea that relationships are not always about us. They're often about other people as well. So a lot of times if people are kind of overly selfish, we have to sometimes coach them and challenge them. Hey, listen, it's not always about you. Think about how your behavior affects other people. Think about the people. Think about who you can give to. Instead of being upset about people not helping you, that's fine. I know that hurts. But you know what? Who are you helping? Sometimes I'll ask my clients that. So I know you're struggling because you don't feel like anyone's there to kind of reach out to you. I'm not trying to discount that. But let me ask you this. Who are you reaching out to? Because a lot of times, part of why people don't reach out to us is we don't reach out to others. And so relationships are two-way streets. And so encouraging and coaching people around relationships is always important from an existential theory perspective. And then there's this deeper idea, of this that I haven't that I kind of summarized for you in your lecture notes as well too, that talks about this idea that the greatest relationship we really have is with ourselves. And what I mean by that is this idea that you and I, there's an old idea that comes out of existential theory, maybe you've heard of it, and it says this: if I don't love and accept me first, I'll have a hard time loving and accepting other people. So I cannot give to someone else what I don't already have. If I've not learned to love me, well, how can I really love you then? If I've not learned to accept me for who I am, how can I accept you? I have to love and learn to, because it's a process, I have to learn to love and accept myself for who I am as a way then to love and accept other people. And one of the reasons why we struggle in relationships with others is because of our own self-esteem. That's, maybe you've heard that idea, maybe you've not heard that idea. That kind of comes a little bit out of existential theory. This idea that a lot of relationship problems are really, if it was me, we would say are really Glenn problems. Part of, if I was someone who struggled in relationships, a lot of times it's easy for me to blame other people. But from an existential theory perspective, the idea would be, well, maybe one of the reasons why Glenn struggles in relationships is because of Glenn, is because of his own feelings about himself and his own self-worth or lack of it. And maybe that's why he struggles in relationships, is because of his own self insecurity within himself, right? So this idea of loving and accepting ourselves as a way to accept other people. Those are just a couple little ideas around relationships. I give you a lot more in the lecture notes as well too, but 5 key ideas. The idea of humility in the person of the helper. The idea of the promoting personal responsibility. Challenging people to be careful about where they look for their purpose and meaning. Encouraging people to live in the now. And then the last idea, being careful about our relationships and promoting healthy relationships and coaching and challenging people around relationships. All of those are 5 key ideas, helping ideas that kind of have their roots in this theory, existential theory. And so again, we're kind of taking this theory, we're kind of building on Freud's theory with this theory, and then come back next time. Our next theory is actually an offshoot of this theory. Carl Rogers' person-centered theory is actually an offshoot of existential theory. It's also very humanistic, and some of the themes we talked about before with these last 2 weeks with this theory, we're going to see again with person-centered theory. So look at the lecture notes, do your discussion questions, do your homework, come back next week. Module number 5 for person-centered theory, and I will see you then. Have a good week.